On April 17, 2004, around 3 p.m, drug dealer Jonathan O'Reilly sat in a BMW outside Clover Hill Prison in Clondalkin. The driver of the car was visiting a friend inside, while O'Reilly and two others waited in the vehicle. The atmosphere seemed calm, but this would soon be shattered by a sudden and brutal attack. Out of nowhere, a high-powered motorbike roared up beside the parked BMW. Two men, their faces obscured by black helmets, sat astride the bike. In a flash, one of them dismounted, brandishing a gun. Without hesitation, he fired 3 shots through the car window. Bullets tore through the glass, fatally striking O'Reilly in the upper body as he sat helpless in the passenger seat. The gunman then leaped back on the motorbike, which sped away, leaving chaos and death in its wake. O'Reilly, who had a 5-year-old son, was part of a notorious West Dublin gang deeply involved in drug dealing since the mid-1990s, and his murder was part of a violent Gangland feud. Just the previous year, O'Reilly had been released from Clover Hill Prison after serving a portion of a 5-year sentence for drug offences. However, this was not his first brush with the law. In 1999, he received an 18-month suspended sentence for an assault committed, while his associate, Edward Murray, faced drug charges. Murray was found with €120,000 worth of heroin during his arrest for suspicion of theft. At their trial, Gardaí testified that O'Reilly had been at a christening party in a Clondalkin pub, where he threatened to break the other leg of a man on crutches. When a customer attempted to intervene, he was brutally kicked and punched to the ground. One of O'Reilly's companions dropped a granite slab on the man's face. Another customer, who tried to stop the fight, ended up with a fractured jaw and cheekbone. When O'Reilly, who was just 16 at the time, and his 3 friends were later arrested, they were covered in blood. O'Reilly's execution was meticulously planned, with the killers having precise information about the movements of O'Reilly and his associates. The BMW had been parked at the scene for less than 10 minutes when the killers struck. In a calculated move, the attacker singled out O'Reilly from the other 2 people in the car. After the shooting, the killers fled to an isolated cottage in Finglas, where one of them was living. There, they enlisted teenager Joey O'Callaghan, who was also staying at the cottage, to hide the gun and burn their clothes. Back at the cottage, chaos erupted in the kitchen. "What if he isn't fucking dead?" one shouted. "We're absolutely fucked," replied the other. When O'Callaghan yelled, "He's after dying," into the kitchen, the atmosphere shifted to one of twisted jubilation. The next few hours were filled with celebratory chinking of glasses, lines of cocaine, and high fives. O'Callaghan, trying to remain inconspicuous, wished he could disappear into the ground, but every so often, the killers would turn their attention to him. They threatened to kill him and his family if he ever breathed a word of what had happened. However, O'Callaghan managed to escape from the cottage with the help of his sister and went straight to the Gardaí. Shortly after, around 30 armed Gardaí prepared for a high-stakes raid. The scene was intense. Vans, battering rams, dogs, officers in body armour, and specialist emergency response vehicles surrounded the area. O'Callaghan first led them to where he had hidden the gun under a tuft of grass, but this was just the beginning. Over the next few hours, he revealed a treasure trove of criminal assets. He showed Gardaí where money, heroin, and cocaine were buried, and even led them to a stolen boot and jet skis. He pointed out flasks and containers concealed in ditches, hedgerows, and makeshift graves. By the end of the raid, O'Callaghan had handed over around €200,000 in cash and an equal amount in heroin and cocaine. The evidence O'Callaghan provided would later become a crucial part of the case against O'Reilly's attackers. But instead of marking the end of his ordeal, it was just the beginning of an existence filled with constant fear and anxiety. A year later, O'Callaghan made a brave and dangerous move by blowing the whistle on the killers. At just 19 years old, he became the chief witness in their trial, earning the distinction of being the youngest person ever to enter the Witness Protection Program in Ireland. In July 2005, the courtroom was tense as the jury delivered their verdict. Killer Thomas Hinchin and his violent sidekick, local milkman Brian Kenny, received mandatory life sentences for the drive-by killing of Jonathan O'Reilly. They also faced additional sentences for threatening to kill O'Callaghan, the state's main witness. When delivering the sentences, the judge remarked, "This was as cold, calculated and premeditated a slaying of a young man as can be imagined." O'Callaghan's testimony had sealed their fate. but his own life would forever be shadowed by the threats and dangers that came up with standing against such ruthless criminals. O'Callaghan himself got caught up in Dublin's criminal underworld when he was just 12 years old. Unwittingly sealing his fate, he talked his way into a job at the local milk float, which turned out to be a cover for drug dealing. Brian Kenny groomed him into gangland life, forcing him to sell heroin. O'Callaghan recounted terrifying meetings with notorious gang boss Marlo Hyland, whose menacing presence loomed over him until Hyland was shot dead. He later revealed he had been driven to provide evidence after enduring years of relentless psychological, physical, and even sexual abuse at the hands of Brian Kenny. O'Callaghan painted a chilling portrait of his life under Kenny's domination, recounting regular beatings and exploitation. Kenny didn't just use and abuse him, he trained him in the dark arts of robbery and drug trafficking. In a poignant revelation, O'Callaghan recalled how he was merely a child when Kenny first lured him into a job on his milk float, unknowingly leading him into the menacing underworld of a gangster disguised as a milkman. Brian Kenny wasn't just a drug-dealing gangster, he was a chilling embodiment of ruthless violence, a character straight out of a crime drama. Rita Harlin, his former partner and the author of a post-incarceration tell-all, portrayed him as a man who mirrored the brutality of TV gangster Tony Soprano. Throughout their tumultuous relationship, Kenny subjected Harlan to nightmarish assaults, even while she carried their child. As his influence in Dublin's criminal underworld grew, so did his descent into instability and psychosis. In one harrowing episode, during a particularly savage attack, he snapped a metal broom handle across her back. Harling narrowly escaped his sadistic grip just months before Kenny committed the ultimate act of violence, the murder of O'Reilly. Despite a conviction stemming from his milk float scam, Kenny's drug empire only grew stronger. After receiving a suspended sentence, he dove back into the underworld with a vengeance, determined to recover his losses. He carried out robberies for Marlo Hyland and aspired to become part of his gang, but was accused of informing to police and hooked up instead with Hinchin, who ran a brutal Clondalkin outfit. Even behind bars, both Hinchin and Kenny reportedly tried to keep their drug operations running. After serving just 16 years behind bars for the cold-blooded murder of O'Reilly, Kenny managed to convince the parole board of his reformation a few years ago, despite O'Callaghan receiving multiple threat-to-life warnings from Gardaí. Described as a highly skilled liar and manipulator, Kenny is considered exceptionally dangerous. Following his transfer a couple of years ago to the open prison at Locken House, Kenny enjoyed a relaxed regime and regular outings with his family. Despite O'Callaghan's impassioned plea to restrict Kenny's freedoms, authorities deemed him a low-risk prisoner, allowing him to partake in shopping sprees and overnight family visits, which left O'Callaghan gripped with fear. Kenny was allowed out for Christmas in 2021 and reportedly became intoxicated, a clear violation of his parole terms. Despite this, he successfully concealed his condition from prison bosses and was granted another temporary release shortly thereafter. However, in February 2022, Kenny was involved in a drug-related incident at the prison, leading to the revocation of his parole. Consequently, he was returned to serving a life sentence at Wheatfield Prison, where his killer pal Hinchin is also incarcerated. Brian Kenny and Thomas Hinchin have never admitted to their crimes or displayed any remorse. Despite the duration of his sentence, Kenny has made few friends behind bars. He is viewed warily by fellow inmates who suspect him of attempting to trade information with prison authorities in exchange for privileges. That was it for today's video. What are your thoughts on today's topic? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to like the video and subscribe to our channel if you'd like to see our next videos.